Hello, and welcome to McLeod Insights, where we feature conversations with longtime veterans who are now team members here at McLeod Software. Our goal with this podcast is to support and empower our customers by helping them learn about proven ideas and best practices that will have a positive impact on how they run their companies. In today's episode, we want to talk about something every company's going to have to deal with, and that's how to make their new people as effective as their experienced people. And I'm joined with my guest today, who is Criss Wilson. Criss, you've joined us before, and Criss is a data scientist here at McLeod Software. Hey, Criss, how are you?
I'm doing well, Robert. How are you doing, sir?
Doing good. So tell me a little bit about your role and some of your history in let's talk about what a data scientist's main purpose really is.
Well, a data scientist basically looks at information that's contained in one or more databases to figure out whether or not there are opportunities to improve the function of a process, be it an automated process or a manual process. Often that involves analytics. And the way that I became a data scientist, it wasn't something I studied to be in college. I studied logistics, finance, and operations management at The Ohio State University. And all along, I was doing what I guess you would call manual labor. I was a warehouseman. I worked for the Limited brands in Columbus in their warehouse and cross dock. I was a driver assistant, and for a brief time, I was also a route driver. So I worked for a beer distributor, basically, and helped on the keg routes and on the packaged routes. And so I'm going to school while I'm doing this, right? And so for me, logistics was natural. Trucking was what I knew. And then when I got out of school, I was employed by Ford Motor Company for a time. And then I found an opportunity with Roadway Logistics System, which is now FedEx Global Logistics, to support the Ford engine plants, the Ford powertrain division. So I did that and then moved through some different accounts, worked with Dell for a time, worked with Siemens for a time, and GE. And then I found my fit with a company called Emerson Electric, a large Fortune 500 company. And I ran logistics there in North Central and South America. And that kind of rounded out my buying experience in terms of transportation. And so I was exposed to all modes: import, export, air, small package, LTL, and truckload. Towards the end of my time at Emerson Electric, a friend of mine who had started her own trucking company was talking to me, and I really felt like I wanted to take a step towards what would eventually become autonomous trucking. And so I agreed to join her to round out my experience from the other side of the equation, which is service provider. So selling, not buying. And I did that for 8 years. And as a result, then I decided that I wanted to take a break. I had sold my farm, and so I was unemployed intentionally for the first time in the 38 years that I've been working in transportation, and enjoying it. And then this opportunity with McLeod came along. So I had a history in helping to develop some different modules with McLeod, one in particular, IQ. And that lent to my experiences as a data scientist directly, because we were creating this business intelligence system from scratch at the time. And so our version of IQ wasn't branded at that point, became the proof of concept for what is now called McLeod IQ.
So, Chris, you and I were having this conversation a few weeks ago, and it was some of the struggles that companies have with new employees. And one of the main struggles that they have is with pricing freight. So, how do you get that information from a mentor or a coach faster to that new employee? Any suggestions?
Yeah, so all of our customers right now are experiencing brain drain, right? They've got employees that are aging out of their workforce, and that presents a special challenge for them because it took 10,000 hours for those employees to accumulate their knowledge, especially around pricing, what transportation services are worth, right? And there's an art and a science to pricing. The science is cost-based. What does it take to run a truck? The art comes in knowing what a customer will pay for that service. So it's not always a cost plus value proposition for a customer. Sometimes there's more value to be had than just the cost and a minor profit margin. So to replace that, you have to basically invest 10,000 hours into a new employee, or at least you used to have to. But data science holds a promise, Robert. We can look at data that is compiled across more than 1,000 customers, and we can help replace that understanding that walked out the door with factual data observations. So using a little bit of statistics and some graphic interfaces that make the information intuitive, we can take a new employee with 3-4 months experience who's just getting off the ground, and we can bring them up to speed in terms of rate knowledge and familiarity with a market pair or a region of the country. We can get as broad or as finite as we need to with a properly engineered screen. And then they can concentrate on negotiation. So it's not a replacement to experience. It's actually a supplement to the experience. It's giving them a tool that they didn't used to have. And so the objective from our data science team is to make them more effective.
I think if you start talking about looking at freight and pricing freight, then you know, some of the more experienced guys and coaches and mentors, they understand what capacity is, whereas a new employee doesn't understand who controls capacity. And is it the asset guy who controls capacity, or is it the broker guy who controls capacity? What's your view on that?
That's a great question. You use an asset provider when you need finite capacity, and you use a broker when you need infinite capacity. Now, truckload in and of itself is considered to be finite capacity. What that means to someone who is schooled in logistics is that capacity is where it is when it is. And it's not always necessarily where you need it. So for a supply chain person, putting my supply chain hat on, my buyer hat on, there were lanes where I would do business with asset-based carriers. We had a private fleet at Emerson during my career. And I knew where they would be and when they would be there. And I had such high volume in these lanes that we built their business around serving our lane segment. And then there were times when I might have a truckload randomly to a customer. It was harder to predict. Real difficult to negotiate that kind of business with an asset provider. They want something that moves with high frequency. And when you can't give them frequency, then you kind of shift over to the broker side to get that infinite capacity, right? Because they can go out and find you a truck when you need it. And that's the distinction. So when you start analyzing lanes as a new employee, if you don't understand who's in control of the capacity, who handles more shipments in that particular lane segment, is it a broker or is it an asset provider? You couldn't possibly begin to know what an appropriate rate is or what an appropriate value is. And so what they tend to lean on are averages, average rates, presented by rate makers, right? DAT, Internet Truck Stop, Market Insight. And when we're using averages, we start to get into a kind of a slippery slope. If we aggregate asset and broker transactions into the same data set and we generate an average rate off of that data set, what's going to happen there is you're going to have an average rate that is too high for an asset provider and too low for a broker. So there's nothing really average about that rate. And there again is an opportunity for data science to get in and clarify for that new or that existing employee. You know, the tools that we've created in Impact, for instance, those will be useful for the rookies as well as for confident operators, somebody that's been doing their job for 3, 4, 5 years, who understands that region of the country. But the problem with a confident operator is rates trends can shift, and they might need a day or two to read that shift. Whereas when rate trends shift and we've got analytics monitoring that business activity, we get an instantaneous result. So time matters as well, Robert. If I'm negotiating, let's say I'm a broker and I need to cover a load today at 1 o'clock. Well, it's already 11. Who has the negotiating leverage, right? It's going to be the service provider. All too often I saw us walk away from a rate that we wouldn't normally pay, but given the time of day and the day of week, 11 o'clock on a Friday, that was a pretty good rate. And it was a lack of situational awareness. And you couldn't blame the employee. They were new. They didn't know any better. And so as we started to set out and to develop Impact, I was thinking about those conundrums, those problems, and asking myself constantly, do we have enough data? Can we fix this problem using an analytic that maybe isn't available at present?
Now, you mentioned two things in there, and I'll come back to them. But the first one you said, we were talking about capacity and the asset guy who may control capacity. But let's be honest, isn't it the driver who controls his own capacity, especially if you're talking about a owner-operator in a full owner-operator situation or company where they decide whether they want to take that load or not? They're in control of their own capacity and then therefore the company's capacity. What's your thought on that?
That's true. Trucking, the asset-based providers, their structure, it used to be, go back 10 years, JB Hunt was almost entirely comprised of company drivers. JB Hunt owned the tractor and the driver was employed by JB Hunt, and they got paid probably on a per mile scale. If they were in a dedicated fleet, maybe they got paid hourly because they were doing city runs. And miles are hard to accumulate in a city environment. But now, fast forward to now, you look at somebody like a JB Hunt, a Schneider, any number of customers that use McLeod software, and you're going to find that the majority of them, or at least half, are owner operators. And when you're dispatching an owner operator, that dispatcher is more of a broker than they are a dispatcher in the truest context of an asset-based dispatcher. Now, when you're dealing with company drivers, let's take Walmart as an example, right? In their fleet, their dispatchers are a little bit more like dispatchers because those are company drivers. They're driving company assets. They don't have to pay for those assets. And so that dispatcher has a little bit more leverage about where that truck's going to end up. So even with respect to an asset-based provider, the amount or the percentage of owner operators versus your total capacity is going to change the way you interact with the driver, or it's going to at least affect it. And Impact, beyond just what the brokers can use it for, is very useful in helping to negotiate with owner operators. We talked a little bit, and I had mentioned to you that the idea in negotiation is you don't want to offend anybody, right? Especially not your driver. Your driver knows what the value of his service is. Now, that driver may not know what the customer is willing to pay, right? And therein is a negotiation. But if you make that driver mad, negotiations have ceased, right? The moment emotions enter into what is a logical proposition, human nature takes over, and often that is counterintuitive to the outcome, which is to create a win-win situation for the driver, for the dispatcher, and for the customer.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you also mentioned there in your previous statement about negotiating or the averages. There's nothing average about a rate. And some of the tools in the market today will give a user the average rate for this lane, this zip code, this street. But is that average really beneficial? I know you also you've got to factor in time. Is this a once load? Is this once a week, 10 weeks? Am I beating or pricing freight for a year? What's your thought on that?
So I like to tell a story. There were two mathematicians and a statistician, and they went out duck hunting. The first mathematician shot at the duck and missed far to the right. The second mathematician shot at that duck and missed far to the left. The statistician said, "Well, boys, looks like we got him. Let's go home." And the point I want to make there is when you're averaging two dissimilar things, asset capacity versus broker capacity, the average you're getting is not useful. And I mentioned it earlier. It's too high for the asset provider and too low for the broker. So in statistician speak, we call that a bimodal data set, meaning there are two causes. You're not at the lowest common denominator. And if you were to graph that rate curve, you would have two peaks, right? One to the left and one to the right. That's the bimodal. So, but keeping it in English terms, right? That's when there's nothing average about the average you're looking at. And, you know, when I was a broker, I knew that there was rate differentiation, but I was using an internal file that said, well, there's convergence in the market and I can use this average. And I lost out on so much business. And so like literally the very first thing I did when I was a data science employee at McLeod was I sank my teeth into our market insight database and I looked at it and I started graphing, right? I'm a data wonk and I always have been. And lo and behold, I discovered that bimodal relationship. And we programmed that into the screen, the rate analysis screen and the rate trend screen. We programmed it into everything because whether you're looking at the volume of orders, you're going to want to know how many are brokered, how many are asset provided. And so once we started parsing that data, I was like that dog that caught the car, right? What's he going to do with it? And what I did with it was we engineered it, the team and I engineered it into our screens. And our customers started really connecting with it, right? They were like, wow, oh, geez, that's useful. And so it was a conversation that occurred between the data science team and one of our customers that really turned us on to the fact that I need to be able to filter out asset-based providers when all I want to do is quote a brokered load. So yeah, if you're not distinguishing between asset-based or broker-based carriers in your data set, that average you're paying a rate agency for is really not very useful. And if all they're giving you is the min, the max, and the average, you have no idea about the market, the underlying market. And yet we're trying to price freight with that information. It's very difficult to do.
I think if anybody has a conversation with you, Criss, I think they'll figure out real quick that you're a statistics type guy and maybe not a negotiator if you look at it in those terms. But tell me how you negotiate. What tools do you use?
So the first thing is, if we're talking about a new employee, I would teach them a technique. It's called the cycle of persuasion. And it's well documented in a book called Just Listen. And it's this methodology, if you will, is used by the FBI in hostage negotiation, right? And one of the rules is to move someone from a very emotional state down into a logical state before you try and talk to them in a logical manner, because you're hitting a wall if they're emotional. They're not hearing you. And so what you need to do is to take them from resisting into listening, and then from listening into considering, and then from considering into doing. And it doesn't end there. You then take them from doing into glad they did, right? If you're trying to persuade someone to your ends only, and they come out thinking, I got wronged in this transaction, then you've just burned a bridge, and that bridge is no longer there for you. It's got to be win-win. So then I try to teach the new dispatcher, sometimes the best negotiation is no negotiation at all. When you get a good price, you've got to be smart enough to know it and strike the deal. That's and in reality, there are enough well-educated drivers in the world to know, based on the time of day and the day of week, what a good rate is. And not everybody's looking to hit a grand slam, right? Some of your best drivers, the ones that are the most productive, lead with a pretty good price. And you got to know when you've got that person on the hook, because if you try and negotiate with them, they're going to draw a conclusion that it's all about you and not about them. And if they say anything, you're lucky. Often they'll just hang up. So I think that there are opportunities with the McLeod TMSs for us to integrate a higher form of logic, often referred to as digital freight matching. And that digital freight matching could usurp a dispatcher having to have a conversation with a carrier, whether it's an asset-based provider or a broker. The technique is the same, and it could match those things that just don't need human interaction, right? And limit the amount of touches that a dispatcher on either a broker or a asset-based provider will have to make. And so we're looking at that with great interest. There's a lot of promise there.
You mentioned a while ago, which depending on your load situation or the price that you're looking for, or the average for that particular lane, whether it's one load, 10 loads, a year's worth of loads, how do trends factor into your negotiation?
That's a great question. So you got to sit there and assess, am I negotiating with this person on the other side for the next 2 years? Because if I am, I need to set my time horizon in the analytics screen to match the period for which I'm going to have to honor this contract. So if I'm participating in a big box retail bid that's going to be good for a year or two, then my time horizons in my analytics are set to a year or two. If I'm negotiating with a driver for a load on Friday at 11 o'clock, and it's just a random one-off that my customer asked me to cover, then I better have my time horizon, I sometimes refer to it as the event horizon, but that time band set in my analytics screen to a week or two at best. Because I'm not trying to negotiate or arbitrage, if you will, a rate that's going to hold for a year. I'm trying to get that load moved now. And so one of the things that a rookie dispatcher has to learn how to do is to assess the relevant time period they're in, that they're negotiating from. Maybe they're doing carrier development for a new customer in a new lane that we're going to have for the next 8 months. then they need to better understand how rates change during the monthly periods that they'll be serving this contract. And all of that is achievable when you're using analytics. Again, a confident operator is going to have a broad understanding of how that market behaves. But if you try and get them to zero in on a specific period of that market, they may be able to change their rate ranges, but they won't have photographic memory going back 2, 3 years, 4 years. And every 4 years, rates in the truckload market cycle, and it's been well documented in white papers. So a rookie's not going to have any understanding of that 4-year cycle or what year of the cycle they're in. But in analytics, we'll have all that data in there. And if they know what question to ask, we'll be able to give them the answer.
Yeah, that's true. But they have to know the question to ask first. And I think that what I heard you say throughout this whole cast was that there are tools out there available that new employees can use that we didn't have when we were doing the role. So take advantage of the tools that are out there and listen to your mentors and coaches. So Criss, if you had a owner or a general manager that you're talking to, what's a piece of advice that you'd give them?
So I would encourage them to steal an example from the good book. I would encourage them to teach their employees how to fish, so that we can feed them for a lifetime. And what I mean by that is there are new tools being introduced by McLeod. And so I'm speaking directly to the owners of fleets that use the McLeod software. Attend this year's AIBI conference. That's Artificial Intelligence Business Intelligence Conference. And that'll be announced here in a coming week or two. And attend the session that talks about the subject matter that we talked about, which is dealing with tribal knowledge. And in there, I'll give some deeper examples and actually show different scenarios and how the thinking changes. So the idea is you want to teach your employee how to think and give them the tools that help them make a good conclusion. So often prior to analytics, the way you taught your employee rates and the rates is to let them go out and negotiate, and you would take some shots, right? You would go negative on a few loads here and there because they just wouldn't understand the mistakes they were making. Now analytics offers the promise that if they know how to think, right, and it's all about the method, preparation, learning the information they're going to need before they start the negotiation. If you can teach them how to think by forcing them to tell you what they're thinking and forcing them to show you the analytics screen contained in a tool like Impact or any of the rate screens, right? If you can hear their thinking, you can help modify that when they've got steps that are out of order, when they're jumping around sporadically, or when they're making an improper conclusion. And that might take a little bit more interaction to start, but you will shorten the burn-in time, the training time, if you will, for that employee in the long run. And you will reduce the number of negative margin shipments that employee will incur as they acquire their 10,000 hours of experience.
That's good, Criss. I like that advice. Well, thank you again for taking the time to join us today. It's been a joy speaking with you. So to our audience, if you have any other questions, feel free to drop Criss an email or myself. It's chris.wilson@mcleodsoftware.com or robert.bowen@mcleodsoftware.com. And you're listening to McLeod Insights. Thank you.